Check it out. How cool is that? It's so sparkly and shiny. We are going to be talking about resin pour. I'll be honest, jumping into this tutorial, I was actually pretty intimidated by resin, but I am so happy and glad that I've tried it. I'll be teaching you guys from start to finish how to complete your own masterpiece and what not to do with resin. At the end of the video, I will be answering a lot of questions. If I don't get around to answering any questions that you have, don't forget to comment down below. I'll try and help you as much as I can. And before we jump into this DIY, my favorite craft store sponsored this post, which is Hobby Lobby. So a huge thank you to Hobby Lobby for sponsoring this post and post DIY, I mean. There's also a blog post. I'll add a link down below. I lost my train of thought. But anyways, let's jump into this tutorial. Okay, so first I made a trip to my local Hobby Lobby for some supplies. This is the resin I got. Picking the right resin is very important. This could make or break your project. I was actually debating on whether I should get some casting resin because it was cheaper and found out that that would have been a complete fail because casting resin sets way too quick. This art resin was in the art section and has about a 45-minute work time, which is amazing. For coloring my resin, I found the perfect shade of pink I needed in the acrylic paint section. Okay, so this heat gun is actually made for embossing, but it worked perfect. I also used my 40% off coupon and I only got this thing for like 13 bucks. Also need 2 measuring cups, your choice of gold paint or pigment. I ended up using these model car enamel paints in the shades brass and gold. You'll also need a canvas or a piece of wood, some ice cream sticks, plastic mixing cups, lots of gloves, toothpicks, tape, and a straw. I also decided to use some crystals to add texture to my art. I couldn't find the crystals I needed, so I actually used clear pebbles and broke them up. To break them up, I dropped them in a pan and heated them up on a low to medium setting for about 17 minutes. Then I dropped them into an ice bath and let them cool for about 5 minutes. At this point, they should be all cracked up inside. Then simply take a paper towel, lay a few out, fold over the paper towel, and use a hammer to break them up. Careful, they will be pretty sharp. Before beginning my art, I drew out an example of what colors and style I wanted. I then marked each cup with all the colors I needed. Make sure your area is prepped really well because this does get messy. I used a plastic tablecloth to protect my surfaces. To prop up your canvas, use 4 plastic cups and tape them to the bottom, making sure they aren't too close to the edges since your resin is actually going to be pouring over. Before you begin mixing your resin, make sure your canvas is level. This is super important. Then put your gloves on and start mixing your resin. For my 18 by 24 inch canvas, I mixed a total of 3 cups of resin. My resin required equal parts of resin and hardener, so I mixed 1.5 cups of resin and 1.5 cups of hardener and combined them together. Make sure and stir your resin for a total of 3 minutes. This step is very important. If you don't mix, it won't set right, as in it won't dry right. It'll be sticky. Once you've mixed your resin, keep your eye on the clock. You'll have about 40 to 45 minutes before it starts hardening. Pour your resin into your marked cups, leaving some clear resin to go onto your canvas for a base coat. You don't need a base coat, but I like that it helps the colors blend more. Following that, add your acrylic paints into your resin, stirring really well. I use a drop of paint at a time to get the desired color. The more paint you add, the faster the resin will set, so keep that in mind. From my experience, I don't add more than 10% paint per the amount of resin you have. You don't need to specifically measure it out, I just eyeballed it. Also, different acrylic paints will be more or less pigmented. I found that this brand of acrylic paints is very pigmented and works really well with resin, so you don't need to add a lot of paint for the color to come out. Okay, now apply clear resin around the edges as well as a thin base coat. Don't be scared to use your hand to rub the resin around. Then I divided my canvas into 2 and poured white on one side and pink on the other. I rubbed both colors into the base coat and poured a black line in the center. I used my heat gun to get the colors flowing, then I added some black bursts around the edges. I heated it up again and tried to blend out my color bursts. I first tried using an ice cream stick and wasn't a big fan, so I opted out for a straw and blew air onto the canvas with my mouth. This method is great because you're in full control of each line. If you're thinking of using a blow dryer, I've tried it and it doesn't work the same. I had a lot of colors just blended instead of it looking like bursts. So when you're using the straw, you're creating defined lines bursting out. Following that, I added some brass with a toothpick. This color was created using the model car enamel that I mixed into the resin. Following that, I blew it around with a straw to blend and added my crystals to the center, making sure they were all touching the resin because the resin is going to act like glue in this case. As you can see, the crystals made the resin spread a little more, so keep that in mind. Then I used my gold enamel straight out of the bottle and dripped it around the crystals. Okay, so keep in mind, a little goes a long way. Once you heat the gold up, it'll really spread. Following that, I used my heat gun on a high setting and held it close to the canvas to spread the gold out. This helped give the gold pretty bursts. I made sure and kind of pulled the gold out from the center with the heat gun. It doesn't blow much air, but it's just enough. Don't hold your heat gun in one spot for too long or too close. It will burn your canvas. This thing gets hot. Then, to add more gold burst, I used a toothpick and added some squiggly lines to my white area and pink area. I also used my heat gun to pull them out and fix them up with a clean toothpick. And for the last step, add resin to your edges. If your resin is pretty stiff at this point, you can melt it a little with the heat gun. Don't worry too much about your edges until the end. This should be your last step. And that's it. I hope this was helpful. So I have a list of questions here that I had when I was jumping into this tutorial. I'm gonna go ahead and answer them for you real quick. It's pretty amazing because you can add acrylic paint, you can add any kind of pigments, which means you could go out and buy special pigments, or you could use like eyeshadow, or, you know, and you could use spray paint. So that's pretty cool. If you add too much paint, believe it or not, your resin will actually harden quicker. So you are allowed to do a 10% ratio to whatever amount resin you have. You don't need to like sit there and measure it out, but the little cups I was doing, I did like a drop or something, and the paints that I use are best for it because they're super pigmented. Your painting should take about 24 hours to dry. If you're planning on shipping it, I would wait at least 48 hours. Okay, so this one was tricky for me because at first I tried it without a heat gun and I thought it was amazing and I had so much fun doing it, and then I tried it with a heat gun and I was like, whoa, this just took it to a whole new level because the colors blended so easily compared to without a heat gun. So I would totally recommend the heat gun, and also it does take away all the bubbles because once you add and pour colors to your canvas, you're gonna get a lot of bubbles. So you're either gonna need to torch it or use a blow dryer to heat it up, but the blow dryer will, keep in mind, blow everything around. So a heat gun would be my best bet. Big tip, you guys, make sure you mix your resin really well. My instructions on my art resin said to mix it for at least 3 minutes. So whatever container you're doing it in, make sure it's not like a huge bowl for just 1 cup. Use a smaller container and make sure you mix it all really well when you're adding paints as well. So for my painting, for example, which is an 18 by 24, I mixed 3 cups of resin in total. So that's 1.5 cups of hardener and 1.5 cups of resin. And then you combine them and mix them for 3 minutes. The resin that I bought, the art resin, actually has a website that helps you calculate how much resin you need. I think it calculated for me to do 15 ounces, and I went ahead and did a little more. And I'm glad I did. Honestly, I would probably change the fact that I used a canvas. I would go with a solid piece of wood because, as you can see, my pink just kind of blended towards the middle on this side, and I think it's because the canvas kind of sank through because I had all these rocks and a lot of heavy stuff going on there. So if I was to redo it, I'd probably definitely go for a solid piece of wood, because I did try a little solid piece of wood, like a test shot, and I loved it. Okay then, everyone, that's it for today. And also, before I go, once again, thank you so much, Hobby Lobby, for sponsoring this DIY. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, give me a thumbs up. If you aren't subscribed, don't forget to subscribe. That's it for today, everyone. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.